to the series. We're going to start covering TypeScript, as I mentioned at the end of the ES6 series. We're going to cover TypeScript because we're going to end up using this for the backend for our project as well as for Angular 2. So that being said, let's get into TypeScript. So the current order of the topics are as follows. It's going to follow a very similar structure to the ES6 series, and hopefully we can get this wrapped up in about a month or so we can get into Angular. So what is TypeScript? TypeScript is a superset of JavaScript. That being said, we have ES6 syntax included as well as all the ES5 syntax that you've been familiar with for a while now. In addition, it adds features into the JavaScript language. One of those features is types. It was developed by Microsoft, but don't worry, it seems pretty nice so far. It's not like some of their other familiar products that we as web developers really disdain. So sometimes we need to forgive people their past transgressions. It does have a little acceptance around the web world. It's not extremely popular yet, but Microsoft is using it. The VS Code IDE that I've been developing in, for instance, is actually developed using TypeScript. And Google has started using it, and Angular 2 is not only built in it, but is best to be used for Angular 2 applications. There are a few pros related to using TypeScript. First of all, the obvious one is going to be types. Types are nice because they take away some of the guesswork as to what a given parameter or property are on an object. That's one problem with picking up somebody else's JavaScript code in the current ES6 framework, is because you have to understand what the code is doing in order to determine what kind of type is expected. For instance, if you see a .2 lowercase, you're going to know that it's a string. Having types being declared within the code kind of takes away all of that work that you have to do as a developer. Next, the tooling support is extremely nice. IDEs such as VS Code have type aheads and quick navigation to declarations of objects or methods, for instance, and that's all possible because of types. You can also now view the API of let's say a method signature in a different file. That's really nice, so you don't have to actually open up that file and search for it. Next, the integration of dependencies is potentially easier. If a definition file exists for a dependency, you're able to view those APIs as you would any code inside of your source if your IDE supports that feature. The other extremely nice aspect of it is it's actually optional. Since TypeScript is a superscript of JavaScript, all previous syntax, including like ES6 classes, are available. So if you really despise having to write TypeScript, you really don't have to. The transpiling works exactly the same as, say, a Babel transpiler, and can transpile ES6 down to ES5 for you just as simply as it can TypeScript down to ES5. The other aspect is it's easier for object-oriented developers to pick up this language. Type definitions are very similar to that of Java, so making that jump from a purely back-end point of view, such as a Java developer who does mostly database access, they can now move to a UI framework a little bit quicker. Next, and this is my favorite aspect, is the introduction of private, protected, and public properties on JavaScript classes and objects. One of the frustrating parts of JavaScript is that you can't hide a variable. For instance, if you set a property that you really don't want modified, you can't set it on an object and then prevent people from accessing that. And TypeScript actually allows you to do that as far as your source code is concerned. Once it gets transpiled down to ES5, you don't really have any protection over it. Now that we've covered the pros, let's get to the cons of TypeScript. You saw types in the pros list. I also consider it a slight con. Types make the code a little more restrictive. It's not as free-flowing because you have to take the time to explicitly state what you're expecting. It's also more verbose due to all the extra types as far as like parameters and return values are concerned. The code's just not as concise, and it adds a lot of fluff that makes it a little harder to read quickly. Granted, it also makes it easier to pick up for people, but at the same time, it's just not as quick to write it. The tooling's also very poorly constructed so far. It kind of takes a long time to set up and learn exactly what's going on. we introduced Webpack earlier. We'll be using Webpack in the TypeScript loader later. But the typings, so basically how an object is expected to be declared for dependencies, getting the understanding of those is very difficult. I've taken the time to do a typing file for one of the dependencies that we'll be using in our backend, and it's just not very easy to pick up. The next part that's difficult is implementing a non-typed library. You have to provide your own typings for non-typed libraries or define it as any. Any is a type that allows you to treat the object as if it were any type, and that defeats the purpose of TypeScript. You lose all your look-aheads, your jump tos, for instance, and it just doesn't serve a lot of purpose. So, with all that being said, my opinion on TypeScript is that I don't particularly care for types in general, but this isn't as painful as they are in other languages like Java. Types allow the IDE look-ahead and the goTo declaration functions, which makes development a lot easier as far as referencing other files and objects. And it's easier to call well-typed dependencies without having to view the documentation. So for instance, when I'm writing an Angular 2 component, I'm able to look at, say, the view decorator and be able to understand what it's expecting without having to go to Angular 2's website in order to figure out what properties are in there, for instance. I'm not entirely sure where the future will take TypeScript, but if Angular 2 takes off as much as it did with Angular 1.5, for instance, the language of TypeScript might actually do pretty well. So that was a quick introduction to TypeScript. I hope that you are excited for TypeScript. It's been an interesting framework to learn. Feel free to contact me on LinkedIn or Twitter, leave a comment below, subscribe, all that fun YouTube stuff, and come back for the next video.